What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you an update on Baldur's Gate 3, and today we are talking patch 7, which from the time of this video actually dropped yesterday. You can update BG3 and play it right now if you've bought into the early access already. First things first, I'm going to talk about the big reveals, if you will, from their Panel From Hell 5th edition, which is the event in which they unveiled all this stuff before dropping the patch. Now, let's get the really big stuff out of the way right off the bat. At the very end of the panel, they actually speculated on the release date for the title. And in Sven's own words, which is like the head person at Larian Studios, he feels that there's about a year's worth of work left on the title, meaning that more than likely they're shooting for early 2023, but they're not planning on releasing the game until it's ready, which I think is the appropriate way to go, obviously, but I just wanted to update everybody. Probably Q1 2023, around there is what I would expect currently. And then our next big bit of news is, of course, the new class added to early access, which is the Barbarian. Now, the Barbarian itself is basically the king of melee DPS. You can also make them very hard to kill. Barbarians function off of their rage mechanic, which allows them to do extra damage, etc., as long as they are either being hit every turn or attacking every turn. They'll be able to do this a few times per day or per long rest in game. And the two subclasses we are getting are Wild Heart and Berserker. Now, Berserker changes Rage into Frenzy, and also adds Enraged Throw, and another ability just kind of capitalizing on the damage gains from Rage is really the point there. And then, more interestingly, in my opinion, we have Wild Heart. Wild Heart allows you to take on an aspect of an animal, if you will. The choices being bear, eagle, elk, tiger, or wolf. Each one of these potential specializations, if you will give you a different benefit primarily to your rage, and will give you a different ability. For instance, the bear will actually make you incredibly tanky as well as give you a self-heal, which for a barbarian is pretty good. The other gigantic change that I really want to mention is the new and updated UI. So the UI saw an almost total revamp, which you should be able to see on screen here. But basically, your UI bar down at the bottom will have tabs. These will separate out your abilities by spell level, by class. There's even some customization available to mess around with it. And overall, it's a much cleaner look. It also combined the inventory and character screens into one nice little splash page, if you will, when you hit your character button, which again just kind of gives you all of the information that was available previously in several menus, boiled down to one menu. They also added a search bar to the inventory, which is a fantastic change, honestly. Larian is known for just terrible inventories, and I'm hoping this search bar and honestly just some filters in general are going to help out a great deal with that. Now, I will say from playing through the patch, my only real complaint about the UI revamp is that every round of combat sees your character just default back to the main tab on the hotbar, which is kind of a combination of a few of the other tabs. And if you're using the custom tab, you kind of set up your abilities. Having to switch back to that every single round of combat is really annoying. So I hope they put something that will just kind of remember what tab you are on. But overall, I think it's a fantastic change, and the UI in general looks much cleaner now. Now, the rest of the updates are definitely very important, and I definitely don't want to understate their importance. For instance, they revamped all of the cinematics. They actually redid about 700 of them, and while the effect is largely the same, essentially this is stuff that just looks like a cleaner transition. The cinematics have focused on different angles, actually adding things to cinematics, etc., just to make them more interesting. So from a visual standpoint, they're just more compelling to watch. And again, they did this to about 700 cinematics by their own count, and there's a lot of cool stuff in there for the feel of it, though I would say in general, there's nothing too crazy there. It just makes it feel like a closer to release version, if that makes sense. Another really big thing they did is that they changed how improvised weapons work. Improvised weapons are basically anything that you can pick up and throw. Up to this point, that has all been by weight. Basically, anything under 10 kilograms did 1d4 damage, anything above that did 2d4. Well, now, when you throw an improvised weapon that is literally your weapon, so you're just throwing your weapon, the damage will actually be based on the weapon that you are throwing. So provided you have the strength to throw it in the first place, this will make things like thrown weapons much more viable. And in addition to that, they've actually updated the sheer variety of things you can throw, such as dead bodies and other characters. Your character can pick up to 3 times their strength, which means that with this new update, things like corpses, and just living enemies, if you have the strength, you can actually just pick them up and throw them. Now, honestly, in a lot of cases, this will require potions, etc., to get your strength up really high to make that super useful, as most enemies weigh around 60 kilograms, and most characters simply aren't going to have 20 base strength to pick up every enemy they meet. But nonetheless, a cool change that will allow you to pick up and throw smaller enemies, basically at will, but also you can do this to allies. For instance, if you have a druid that can shapeshift into something smaller, you could have a character pick up your friend, throw them across a gap, etc., which just opens up a lot of cool play style sort of ideas. They've also added some new music tracks, made some small changes to how multiplayer works just to make it a little better in general. And then this was something that sounded really big, but I have yet to hear a difference. And that is apparently they re-recorded all of the narrator stuff. So in theory, that should sound better, but I personally did not notice a difference in quality myself. But I honestly don't really have an ear for that kind of thing. And last but not least, we have what I feel like might prove to be a somewhat controversial change. So they revamped the light and dark system. Now, on one hand, this will make characters with dark vision more noticeably useful because that character will have a sort of almost flashlight-like effect as they turn and look places coming out of their eyes that will enable them to see pretty clearly. And if you don't have dark vision, it's going to be much darker around that character and harder to see. But this also changes things in terms of dungeons. So these new lighting effects actually make it to where you cannot just scroll your map over and see what's laying in wait for you in the next room. Now you have to go manually enter that room to actually get any sort of vision on it. Now, from a realism standpoint, this makes perfect sense. And even if a door was locked previously, etc., you could highlight items and find enemies just by running your mouse over the place. Well, now that's no longer possible, which is definitely more in line with how it should be. I'm just curious to see what people are going to make of this change, honestly. But that's pretty much all I've got to report in terms of the actual changes. So now I'm going to offer a bit of an opinion here at the end. And that is, honestly, I think this patch is a very big step in the right direction. I was hoping to see a few different things personally, such as an increase to level 5. If you're unaware, level 5 in D&D brings about a lot of very strong changes, and I'm hoping that at some point they add that so those big changes can be tested, as it is very easy to get to level 4 very quickly in early access before you've even cleared a portion of the content available. Beyond that, I really love seeing the new class. The new class is more than welcome. I personally find Barbarians a little boring. If you want to play an amazing melee guy, they're definitely your go-to. But personally, I was hoping to see the Paladin myself. Nonetheless, cool to see. But overall, my impression from this update is that they are moving into finalizing a lot of things. So this UI looks like a clean sort of finalized UI that you would see in a released game, as opposed to the sort of clunkier iterations we've seen up to this point. In fact, in some ways, they just made the UI a little bit prettier, as opposed to functional, which is a difference you see between early access and release a lot of the time. Combine that with making things like the cinematics more visually impressive, etc., and by their own admission, with there only being, in Sven's perspective, about a year's worth left of work to do, definitely implies to me that they are just moving towards finalizing everything. And while they're certainly not to the finish line is in sight, and we're seeing a lot of these systems tighten up. And my only concern at this point is that really there's just a lot missing from early access still. And in my experience with video games, anything that does not get tested in early access will be in a poorer state on release than the part of the game that was in early access. And with so many eyes on this game, I would hate to see it release and the parts of the game that just did not get tested in a widely available realm ultimately wind up falling flat in a way that could have been prevented if they just put them out there for testing. Now, at this point, they've pretty much doubled down on their approach, and while I would like to see a lot of things tested, I genuinely am just thinking it's not going to happen at this point. But nonetheless, we will see how it goes. But there you go, guys, an update on Baldur's Gate 3 and the recently released patch 7. Hope you enjoyed the video. By all means, let me know about your thoughts down in the comments section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.